Hello everyone, it's Irene. It's another interesting dumpster diving story on finds. So let's dive in and see what it brings. Marlie Gaines pulled over so fast she almost missed the curb. One minute she was driving through a quiet neighborhood outside Savannah, Georgia, and the next she was staring at a moving out pile that looked like every other one: boxes, old towels, kid clothes, the usual. But right on top sat a hand woven laundry basket, the kind you don't see anymore unless it's a museum on your grandmother's attic. Marley was 64, a retired history teacher with a soft spot for old fabric, and her brain didn't see trash. It saw clues. She told herself she'd grab the basket and keep going, 5 minutes in and out. Marley wasn't broke, not even close. She had a cozy little house and a normal retirement. What she didn't have was the one thing she wanted more than comfort: a way to save the old city library that was about to be shut down for budget reasons. The library had been her second home when she was a kid, and she couldn't stand the idea of turning it into empty rooms and dusty locks. So she hunted for history whenever it got thrown away: curbsides, thrift stores, dumpsters behind estate cleanouts. Not for thrills like a teenager, for her it was like digging up a story people tried to forget. The basket was heavier than it looked. Inside were yellowed baby shirts, worn towels, and a couple of tired blankets showed in like someone cleaned fast and didn't care. Marley didn't judge. Moving makes people ruthless. She lifted the basket into her trunk, glanced around for any free sign, and saw none. Still, nobody came out. No one shouted. The curb pile sat there like an invitation, and Marley had learned that when people truly want something back, they don't leave it in the weather. And started sorting, planning to wash that was usable and donate the rest. That's when she found it at the bottom: a dark navy blanket, plain and heavy, smelling like old closet and faint dust. It looked like a basic military blanket, nothing special, nothing pretty. But when Marley ran her fingers across the edge, she felt something that didn't match the rough wool: tiny bumps, like knots or stitches hiding under the surface. She brought it inside and laid it flat under a lamp. The fabric didn't lie, the stitching along one seam was just a little too careful for a cheap blanket, and the corners were reinforced in a way that felt intentional. Marley grabbed a small seam ripper from her sewing tin and opened only a half-inch. Slow and neat, under the outer layer was another fabric, older, softer, and patterned in faded reds and creams. No modern printing, real patchwork. Her throat tightened, not from fear, but from recognition. She widened the opening and froze. Hidden inside that plain navy cover was a quilt, folded and protected like somebody's secret. The stitches were hand-done, uneven, in the most human way, and along one strip were these tiny symbols: stars, arrows, little shapes that weren't decoration. They looked like messages, the kind of thing women once used when they weren't allowed to write freely, when they had to hide meaning inside clothes because paper could get in trouble. Marley sat back, staring at the quilt like it might blink. She didn't want to say the words out loud yet, because saying them made them real. But she'd taught this era for years, and she'd seen photos in archives, listened to old oral histories, and held the reproduction quilts in her hands for school programs. This wasn't a cute antique. This felt like a piece of the Civil War era, something that was never meant to survive in a laundry basket on a curb. And if it was real, then it wasn't just valuable, it was wanted. Marley folded the gilt back into the blanket cover carefully, like she was tucking a fragile truce away. Then she looked at the basket again and realized something that made her stomach drop. If someone hid this inside a plain heavy blanket, what else got thrown out today that was never supposed to be seen? Marley didn't run around town announcing what she had. She treated that quilt the way you treat a fragile letter from a stranger: carefully, quietly, and with clean hands. She slid it back into the navy cover, wrapped the whole bundle in an old cotton sheet, and set it on her dining table like it was a sleeping thing. Then she did what she'd always done as a teacher. She looked for proof, not options. A real artifact doesn't need hype, it needs a trail. The next morning, she drove to a well-known antique dealer an hour away, the kind of place with glass cases and soft lighting and a bell on the door. She didn't walk in saying, "Civil War quilt." She said, "I found an old blanket with a quilt inside. I'd like to know what is it." The dealer, a smooth man named Brand, lifted his eyebrows like he was already bored. Then he touched the stitching just once, and Marley saw the tiny change in his face. It was quick, but it was there, like a poker player trying not to blink. Brand set it down and leaned back like the quilt was nothing. "Nice piece," he said, too calm. "But I've seen this. A lot of copies were made in the 1950s. People love to look. He shrugged and taped the fabric with one finger. I could give you $400. More than fair, really. You'd be surprised how many folks think they've got treasure. He said it kindly, like he was doing her a favor, and that's what made it ugly. He wasn't just offering low, he was trying to make her feel silly for even asking. Marlie smiled the way she smiled at students who tried to bluff their way through a book report. I understand, she said, and she folded the bundle back without rushing. She didn't argue, didn't accuse, didn't give him a pleasure or fight. She just stood, thanked him for his time, and walked out with the guilt held tight against her ribs. In the parking lot, her hands were steady, but her stomach was hot. She knew that look he tried to hide. He knew it was real, or real enough to be dangerous. Back home, she didn't go online looking for strangers to clap. She went hunting the only way she knew, through old words. She pulled up digitized archives, local church records, and the Women's Aid Society minutes, anything tied to sewing circles in coastal Georgia and the inland routes people used when the country was split in half. Then she found a name that made her sit up straight. A diary from a 1960s seamstress, scanned and stored by a university project. One entry mentioned a navy cover stitched over a freedom quilt so it could travel without drawing attention. Another described a strange border of stars and arrows, signals soon for a man who couldn't be guided out loud. Marlie laid her quilt beside the screen and compared the details, the same odd star count, the same arrow pattern tucked near the corner seam, the same small mistake in one block like the writer had laughed about it and remembered it forever. That's when the maybe in Marlie's mind snapped into something harder. This wasn't a cute antique someone tossed by mistake. This was a piece of history that had been hidden on purpose and then forgotten. That afternoon, a card appeared under her windshield wiper when she stopped at the grocery store. No drama, no man in black, just a business card from Brent's shop with a note on the back. Call me, I can do better. Marlie stared at it, and for the first time she felt the real pressure. Not fear of violence, but the sick knowledge that once the wrong person smelled value, they didn't let go. They just changed the angle, quietly, patiently. She went home, locked her door, and slid the quilt into the safest place she had. Then she opened her laptop and drafted a listing for Serious Textile Auction. Simple photos, careful language, and one line of provenance that mattered more than any sales pitch. A matching diary entry, dated, archived, and impossible to fake without years of effort. When she hit submit, her hands didn't shake, but her heart did just a little, because now the quilt wasn't just hers to protect. Now it was visible, and the people who tried to buy it for $400 were about to realize what she'd really found. The first thing Marlie noticed after her listing went live wasn't fame, it was silence, the kind that happens when the right people see something and stop talking out loud. A few days passed, and her inbox began to change tone. Not is this still available messages? These were short, careful notes from museum buyers and textile specialists who didn't waste word. They asked one thing over and over in different ways. Can you confirm the stitching matches the diary description? Marlie answered with the same steady calm every time, because she wasn't selling a blanket. She was handling a piece of the country back to itself. Then Brent called. He didn't leave a thread. He didn't need to. His voicemail sounded friendly, almost warm, like they were old friends. Marlie, it's Brent. I saw your post. You're about to get taken for a ride. These big auctions chew people up. Call me back. I'll make you a clean offer. No hassle. Marlie listened once, then deleted it. The pressure wasn't scary anymore, it was obvious. He wasn't worried about her, he was worried about losing his shot. When the auction date arrived, Marlie didn't sit in front of a screen like it was a sporting event. She made tea, folded laundry, and kept her hands busy the way she always had. But every so often she paused and glanced at the time, feeling the strange mix of pride and nervous that comes when you've done the work and now you can't control the outcome. She didn't want a miracle for herself, she wanted a miracle for the old library building with its leaking ceiling tiles and closing rumors taped to the front door like a slow goodbye. That afternoon, her phone rang with a number from out of state. The voice on the other end was professional and bright, the kind of voice trained to deliver big news without sounding dramatic. Mrs. Harlan, I'm calling with the final bid. Marlie's fingers tightened around her mug. The number landed like a soft punch. $85,000, and the buyer wasn't a private collector, it was a museum acquisition group, real money, real purpose, real history, rescued clean. She set the mug down and just stood there, staring at her kitchen wall like it had shifted. $85,000 wasn't a fantasy fortune, it was something better, it was enough to do something, enough to keep a promise she carried for years every time she drove past that library and saw the lights off in the reading room. Brent called again the same evening, like he'd been pacing with his phone in his hand. This time he didn't pretend he was helping. "Name your price," he said, clipped and annoyed. "I can beat whatever they told you." Marlie didn't raise her voice, she didn't gloat, she just said, "You told me it was a copy and offered $400. There was a pause, long enough to feel him swallowing his pride. "People make mistakes," he muttered. Marlie's reply was gentle and final. "They do. Good night, sir." And she hung up, feeling lighter than she had in months. A week later, she walked into the city library like she belonged there, because she did. The building smelled like old paper and tired carpet, and the front desk clerk looked up with the wary expression of someone who'd answered the same bad questions all months. Marlie didn't give a speech, she asked for the director, and when the director arrived, hair pulled back, sleeve rolled up, eyes already braced for bad news, Marlie handed her a simple envelope. Inside was a check, large enough to make the woman's face go still. Not movie shocked, just the kind of quiet shock that turns into tears when you finally understand you're not alone. The town didn't suddenly turn into a fairy tale, but things began to change fast in the way small places change when one problem finally gets solved. The library fixed what mattered first: lights, roof patches, working computers, a safe place for kids to sit after school. On the first day, a little boy ran his fingers over a scrap of worn fabric and whispered, "This is from a long time ago." Marlie smiled and said, "And it made it all the way to you." They hung a framed photo on the wall near the entrance, a navy-wrapped quilt corner, a small caption beneath it that read, "Found at the Curbside for history." Marlie didn't put her name in the big letters, she didn't need to. She sat in the back one afternoon as kids listened to the story hour, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the deep, clean satisfaction you only get when you win without becoming someone you don't like. Later, driving home, she passed the same curbside street where she'd found the laundry basket. The spot looked ordinary now, just a line of grass and the mailbox posts. Marlie didn't slow down, she didn't need to chase lightning twice. She already had what she came for. Proof that in a world that throws away treasures without looking, knowledge is its own kind of power, and one good find, handled the right way, can keep a whole town from going dark. That's it. Please share in the comments. How do you like the story? Do you have your own to share? Please share your own story, by the way, and maybe one day we'll read it here. And please give me a thumbs up if you like the content and subscribe.